Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa, and if this is your first visit, welcome. If you're a returning subscriber, hey, welcome back. Today, I'm going to discuss parental alienation, triangulation, and how it affects step parents as well as the biological parents. Now, to me, the worst thing about parental alienation is the biggest victim of this is the child or the children involved. I'm going to be sharing my personal experiences with my narc ex-husband and my stepson. And the reason I share a lot of my own experiences on this platform is because so many others have had the same or similar experience. And it helps people to not feel alone. It's not just happening to you. And I just want to reiterate that if a child is enduring parental alienation and being used as a pawn to get at the other partner, this is extremely damaging to the child, not just in the present moment, but there are long-term effects on this. Children need to be put first, and with narcissists, unfortunately, this is never a guarantee. The narcissistic parent often, quote, love bombs and devalues their child. That is to say, they alternately praise them between criticisms and put-downs. The narcissistic parent devalues and demeans the targeted parent either directly to the child or within earshot of the child. The narcissist may even try to get the child to spy on the other parent and report their findings back to them. They may tell the child that their other parent is crazy or in some way mentally unwell. Since the narcissist has no empathy, they don't consider the fact that the child realizes that they are physically part of each parent. Therefore, if one parent is seen as, quote, bad, the child may consciously or subconsciously begin to believe that part of them is bad too. My narc husband often spoke horribly of his son's mother, telling him that she was unstable and that she was mentally ill. Now, I do not believe this woman was mentally ill. However, she was completely overwhelmed because the narcissist had dumped her suddenly. She was devastated emotionally and financially. And she had been staying home raising their son for 13 years. Yet my ex-husband, who has a lot more money, successfully won custody and was able to move their son to another state, which of course made it more difficult for my stepson to see his mom and for his mom to see him. I had been around my stepson many times before he was actually living with us full-time due to the custody battle, and we got along great. The problems started after he came to live with us full-time. And a big reason for that was he didn't want to be there. He had grown up in LA and he missed his life in LA, which was vastly different to the small town in the state of Oregon where we lived. And of course, there was some resentment toward there being a new person there, namely me, someone who was not well known to him and someone who was not his mom. So he did become a bit standoffish for a while, but I never gave up on him, and I would remind him that I wasn't trying to take his mom's place, that I just wanted to be a friend, and that since I was a mom myself, I tended to do mom-like things like being nurturing toward him when he didn't feel well, etc. And due to his age when I met him, which was 13, I never felt it was my place to tell him what to do or to discipline him in any way, nor did I want to. So prior to meeting my stepson, his father bragged so often about how close they were. But in 7 years, I never saw this. In fact, I was amazed when I did meet my stepson, and I noticed that not only did he not seem to want to spend much time with his father, he also called him by his first name. And that was really different for me. And it wasn't just the fact that he wasn't calling him dad. It was the tone of voice that was very disrespectful, in my opinion. And I grew up in the South. I just never had heard that before, so it was really unusual to me. Now, my husband claimed that he wanted the two of us to get along, but that wasn't the actual truth, because he seemed irritated rather than pleased whenever he saw my stepson and I, just joking around, and then would later criticize me for, quote, acting like a child. My stepson and I also never had a direct conflict with one another. However, sometimes I would come home from work and it was so obvious that he was upset with me. And at the time, my husband told me he's just being a moody teenager, which seemed plausible since my stepson also seemed irritated, not just with me, but also with his dad. So I just let his moodiness slide and I continued to treat him with kindness and respect. I was being triangulated and I didn't know it. Surprisingly enough, though, I stood up for my stepson in situations that his own father did not. For example, one year we had a lot of snow, and a friend of my stepson's had gotten her car stuck in the snow. She had called her father for help, and for whatever reason, her father couldn't come help her out. So my stepson went, he had a big truck, and he pulled her car out for her. Evidently, this caused her car bumper to be slightly scratched, and the girl's father contacted both my husband and I, as well as my stepson, very angry about it. Now, I never responded to this man, and I immediately took my stepson's side because he was sincerely trying to help his friend. However, his father criticized him, saying, "You see what happens when you try to help someone? That was your first mistake." I was floored. He was actually condemning his son for showing kindness, for showing consideration and empathy. In fact, if my stepson was upset, and especially if he was crying, I never saw his father console him. Rather, he told him to, quote, man up, or, quote, not be a pussy. Another time, I confronted this girl who my stepson was dating that was jerking him around, and this resulted in one of the nastiest rages I have ever experienced from my husband. To this day, I have no idea what my husband actually said to his son about my interaction with the girlfriend, but I do know he blew it out of proportion since I never raised my voice to the girl. I just called her out on her BS. Now, I would have done exactly the same if this had involved my own children, and I treated my stepson like he was my own child, and that's the way I saw him. He was part of my family, and I was sticking up for him. And so, but unfortunately for me, this whole situation resulted in my husband raging at me for hours, screaming obscenities at me and threatening to kick me out of the house. And then his rage finally dialed back down to a more passive rage, which manifested in my receiving the silent treatment from him for days. My husband would also blame his own nasty behavior towards me on his son. It didn't seem to matter what the issue was. Somehow he pulled his son into whatever the issue was. And I noticed whenever he was pleased with his son, he absolutely took the credit because, he's a phenomenal parent. If he was displeased with his son, of course, took the blame, and many times so did I. And I would notice that when I would come back from being out of town, often the first thing I would hear from my stepson was, "I'm so glad you're back." Because he knew that when I was there, I was like the buffer. I was the scapegoat instead of him. And while I never yelled at my stepson, I never spoke hatefully to him, my husband had no problem at all lecturing my adult children, screaming at me in front of both my own son and his, in a situation in which my stepson even stuck up for me to his dad, which unfortunately for me made the whole thing worse because my husband was completely offended that his son dare take my side. And there's a video that I've dropped the link in the description box. That's the video of my husband screaming at my daughter, who he has also since included in his smear campaign against me. Meanwhile, I have never spoken of my stepson in a negative way, not in person, not behind his back, and certainly not on this channel. I loved him, and I still do. And I'm proud of him, since despite the behavior of his own father, this young man has grown into a very responsible individual who already owns his own business at the age of 22. And through the years, I witnessed his mixed loyalties, alternating siding with his mother and then his father and back and forth. It was certainly a confusing and a trying time for him. However, he ended up becoming loyal to himself. And I have seen him display kindness. I've seen him show consideration and display empathy. So thankfully, he is not a narcissist. In fact, of all of the flying monkeys that my narcissist has sent to harass me since our divorce, my stepson has never followed suit or been nasty to me in any way. And I really believe this is because he was there and he witnessed so much. He witnessed the entire scream fest from his father to my daughter. He witnessed his father screaming obscenities at me. He grew up with his father screaming and devaluing his own mother. And he witnessed the screaming coming from her as well, due to the reactive abuse because of what she was experiencing. So for those of you with stepchildren, or even if they're not, what has your experience been like? Did you experience triangulation? Let me know in the comments. And again, no matter how evil and nasty the narcissist you're trying to co-parent with is behaving, please keep the best interests of your child as the priority. Show them a good example by your own behavior, or at the very least your behavior in front of them. And as hard as it is, don't stoop to the narcissist level by talking negatively about them to or in front of your child. Thank you all so much for watching, and may your day be blessed.